Welcome to the State of Mirrorless, our series of interviews with photographers that use mirrorless camera systems. Today, our guest is going to be Dan Bailey from far up north in Alaska. Right, Dan?
Yep, I live in Anchorage, Alaska.
And you are, how would you define yourself? I read from your blog you're an adventure, travel, location photographer.
Yeah, I do adventures. I shoot adventure, action, travel, outdoor work. So I call myself an adventure outdoor photographer.
Yeah,
but I do like to do travel as well.
Yes, you've been active as for many years. I think it's more than 20 years or almost 20 years.
Yeah, I bought my first camera in 1990, and I turned pro in 1996. So it's been about 18 and a half years of full-time professional freelancing.
I guess moving from film to digital.
Yeah, I shot digital. I shot film until I think 2006 was when I made the jump to digital, and then in 2000 and last year I transitioned to mirrorless. So,
yeah, I was reading your blog post that you posted a couple days ago, I think, about your complete transition to a mirrorless system. You were shooting Nikon or Nikon, depending on.
Yeah, I was my first camera was a Nikon, and I collected a lot of Nikon gear over the years, and I really loved that stuff. But as the mirrorless camera started to get better and the technology started to advance, I started experimenting with those, and what I really liked about them was that they were light and small, and they actually reminded me of my first Nikon FM2. And so, over the years, the cameras got a lot bigger, and so I liked going back to a smaller camera because I'm quite active, and I like to move quickly and go light through the world. And so now that I find the mirrorless cameras that I use are good enough to capture the subjects that I shoot, and I love the image quality, and I just think that I think DSLRs are very powerful tools, but I think that mirrorless cameras represent the future.
So you sold all of your Nikon equipment?
Yeah, I kept it on the shelf for about a year, but I hadn't used any of it. And every day I'd look at it and go, wow, that gear is so awesome. I used to love shooting with that gear. And then eventually I just got to the point where I can only keep stuff on the shelf that I'm not using for so long. It loses value and takes up space. So I just decided to trade it in. And there were a couple other lenses that I wanted to get. And so I just traded up and bought another Fuji XT1 body and a couple other Fuji lenses.
So you're using a Fuji-based system right now. Okay, can you tell us a bit about what's in your bag nowadays?
Yeah, so I've been shooting with the Fuji XT1, which is, it's in terms of the size, it's quite small, and actually, if you excuse me for just a second. It's not much different in size than my original Nikon FM2 body. So I feel like I've come full circle. But what I like about the XT1 is that it's weather sealed. It's got fast autofocus. It's got an SLR style body, so it feels familiar. It just feels really comfortable in my hands, and it's a high performance system. So it does, I like to think that the XT1 was built especially for me because it fits my style perfectly, and it has the performance to handle the fast action and the rugged environments when I shoot.
Yeah, given your style of photography, I guess that weather sealing is a very important feature to you.
Yeah, weather sealing is very important, especially in the body. I shoot in wet environments where there's wind, driving rain, snow, extreme temperatures, and so I need a camera that's going to be able to keep the dust and the rain out, and also that's built tough. You know, I've seen plastic lenses and plastic bodies get smashed when you bang them against the rocks, and so I like the bodies that are made with metal chassis and just be able to handle being knocked around.
So it's keeping up with the promise of actually being weather resistant and rugged enough for your style of work.
Yeah, you know, when the mirrorless cameras were first introduced, Fuji had some great cameras, and Olympus and Sony, but the earlier models, they weren't weather sealed. I did do a trip with an XE1. I did a bike tour in Europe with that, and it wasn't a rugged trip, but you know, I'm riding with the camera all day, and we encountered rain. But it's not a rugged camera, and so the XT1 is actually built, you know, to be a tough, rugged model. It's actually got, aside from the weather sealing, the electronic viewfinder is insulated in a little bit, so it keeps the temperature consistent, which makes the video feed have a consistent color cast.
And how do you find the electronic viewfinder?
You know, the first camera that I used, the XE1, which I thought was okay, and I lived with it, but the XT1 has an amazing viewfinder. It's a huge view. It's a bigger view, a bigger magnification view than any of my other cameras, and the quality of the image it's stunning. You know, essentially I'm looking at a little TV screen inside the camera, and you know, it doesn't have the same clarity as looking through a pentaprism viewfinder on a DSLR, but in good light, it's surprisingly good. I forget that it's an EVF. And one advantage is that when it's dark, you can actually see, because the EVF, you know, brightens the image up. And so it obviously looks digital, but you can still see. Whereas if you take a pentaprism viewfinder camera into a very dark environment, you can't see, because you're just using natural light. So there are advantages to both systems, but obviously the mirrorless EVF is a lot smaller. It takes up less space.
Yeah, I was, again, I have an XE2, and I was testing a friend's XT1 the other day. It was not the first time I try to stay away from the XT1, because when I hold it in my hands and I look at that amazing viewfinder, I always feel like I need to switch, to upgrade to an XT1, but I'm trying to resist the urge to do that. It's really great to look at that viewfinder, especially.
So you have the XE2. Didn't Fuji, you correct me if I'm wrong, did Fuji update with the firmware the viewfinder a little bit? Is it better than it was?
Not in the last upgrade. No, I don't think there were anything meaningful in this respect with the last firmware upgrade.
Yeah, because I know that they've.
I have the X100S and the XE2. And the XE2 is a more recent generation of viewfinder. So it's a bit small, but it's miles better than the X100S, and which I think is comparable to the XE1.
Yeah.
But the XT1 is totally on another planet.
Yeah, I'm quite impressed with that. I like I said, when I'm shooting in good light, I almost don't even. It doesn't even feel like I'm looking through an electronic viewfinder.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and the other advantage is that I do use the LCD screen a lot. You know, if you're shooting a lot of high-angle work, or if you're trying to get different vantage points, the tilt screen and being able to look at your image on the back panel is really convenient sometimes. So that's one other advantage of mirrorless cameras. I'm able to go back and forth between looking through the viewfinder or looking at the LCD screen, just whichever situation works the best at that time.
Yeah. I was meaning to ask, aside from the body, what is typically in your camera bag in terms of lenses? Do you routinely carry a tripod, flashes, filters?
So my camera kit will vary depending on what kind of activity I'm doing. And so I've got a few different setups. So if I'm going super light and fast, I'll take the XT1 body and one lens, maybe the 18-135 zoom lens or the 14 millimeter wide angle. And it might throw in the tiny little 27 millimeter pancake because it doesn't take up any room. It's just itty bitty. If I need to have a little more range with the zoom, I like the new 50 to 140 2.8 that Fuji just came out with recently. And that's a lot like my old 80 to 200 2.8 Nikon, fast telephoto, big glass. And it's, certainly heavier than the 18 to 135, but it's incredibly sharp lens. And, it's a pro quality lens. I need that. So I'm willing to carry the extra weight. And then I just bought the 23-1.4, which I like a lot. I've never owned a 35 millimeter lens on my Nikons, but this 23 just has a really interesting viewpoint, and I love how it looks. So I'm excited to try that out as well. I normally like primes in the mid range. I've got the 14 and I've got the 23, and I did buy the 56 for portraits, 56-1.2, but I don't use that so much on adventures because it's not a fast autofocus lens. That's where I'll take the 18 to 135.
Anything wider than 18?
So I've got the 14.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And so that's equivalent of a 21 full frame, and that's a really good range for me. I like that a lot. That's actually my favorite lens. If I had to give up all the others, I'd probably keep the 14 and then closely behind the 50 to 140.
Good. Do you? So is what I discovered when I switched to mirrorless myself is that my bag didn't actually become lighter and smaller because once you have a bag, you tend to stuff in it everything that you can possibly stuff in it. So whereas before I was traveling with one DSLR body and maybe 3 lenses, now I might be traveling with 2 mirrorless bodies and 5 lenses just because they fit in the bag. So I found that I didn't really get a lighter backpack, but I can carry more with. Do you experience the same, or did you actually manage to get a lighter pack?
Yeah, I feel that there's a significant weight savings using the mirrorless gear. Even if I have my XT1 body and the big 50 to 140 lens and maybe 1 or 2 other lenses, it's still lighter than all that other DSLR lenses that I would have carried, and the body alone is a lot lighter. So I find a great savings in weight, especially when I'm going, with just the body and 1 or 2 lenses. So if I'm taking everything with me, it's a bigger bag, but it's still lighter than the old gear.
All right. Let's talk a bit more about you and your photography rather than cameras, which in the end are just tools.
Yeah.
They work well, fine, but that's not what counts. I mean, so you've been shooting for 20 years. You've been doing adventure and travel. Can you tell us a bit more about what it means to be an adventure and travel photographer? Do you go on assignments? What are your favorite destinations? What kind of destinations do you prefer?
Yeah, so the adventure photography business does involve assignment work, and so I've gone on assignments for different magazines and outdoor companies to different locations. I'd like to do a lot of trips on my own and then come back later and try to sell the images as stock or through photo essays or articles. So I've been to the Himalayas a handful of times. I've been to, I've done bike tours in Spain and India and through the Alps. and I've done a lot of adventures here in Alaska. I used to live in Colorado, so I did a lot of rock climbing and mountain biking in Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, California. So I try to get around as much as I can.
So what is your favorite destination? The favorite destination that you have been to, and the one that you have not been to, where you would like to go most?
I've got a big list. I really have, and I've enjoyed my Himalayan trips. That part of the world is just immensely fascinating. The landscapes and the cultures are, the most beautiful and rugged and amazing, and just the most spectacular scenery and peoples and cultures in the world, I feel. I love Alaska. Alaska has some amazing scenery that's unlike anywhere else in the world. As far as where I want to go, let's see, where do we start? Patagonia, Mongolia, Western China, South America. I'd like to spend more time mountain biking through the Alps. I've got a pretty big list. Scandinavia, I'd like to do some traveling in Norway.
Iceland?
Yeah, I went to Iceland a year and a half ago, and I'd love to go back. I was only there for a week, so it's definitely on my list.
Are you more into unspoiled natural wilderness places, or do you also like to explore a bit more cultures and people and monuments, cities?
I like both, and that's one of the things I really like about bike touring. I've done some tours in the past, and I enjoy traveling by bike because you can spend a few days out in the wilderness and away from everybody else, and then you can ride into cities and spend some time in towns and villages and interact with people and see cultural aspects of the place you're traveling. Traveling by bike is so disarming because it's, you just perceive as being friendly when you're on a bicycle. There's what's nothing threatening about a guy on a bike. Mm-hmm. And then, yeah, you can see a lot of places quickly and cover a lot of ground and a real variety of terrain. But I also really love hiking in the backcountry where you're just away from everything, for miles and miles and miles away from any kind of civilization. So it just depends on the adventure. Each thing kind of has its own flavor.
What suggestion would you give to an aspiring adventure photographer?
I think the best thing you can do is to start having adventures. Just go into the wilderness, go into the outdoors, and have adventures, and take as many pictures as possible, and just practice your craft and figure out what it is about your style or about the areas you visit that appeals to you, and try to make photographs that reflect those aspects.
Is that still a kind of a sector of the profession where it's possible to break out if somebody is good and passionate and persistent, or it's like many others where it's become very hard to make a living and to break out into?
I think that it's always been hard. I think that if you talk to guys who have been doing this for a long time, they'll say the same thing. It's always been hard. It's hard now. It was hard 10 years ago. It was hard 20 or 30 years ago. What happens, though, is that you have new opportunities that open up every generation. And so now we have an enormous amount of opportunities where anybody has huge possibilities for getting their work out and getting their work seen through different social media outlets, self-publishing, websites. So, and from the professional standpoint, the art buyers and the photo editors they have a much wider pool in which to find people. And so they'll look on different social media networks. And what we're seeing is that some of the people are getting assignments or even getting their foot in the door are not necessarily established pros. They're people who take great photos who've managed to get their pictures out there on some level, through some channel, and the right person happens to view it at the right time. But it's always been that way, whether you're handing out promo cards or making office visits and visiting art directors or posting your stuff on the web. It's all about getting your stuff out there to as many channels as possible and hoping the right person sees it at the right time.
What other photographers would you consider your main source of inspiration, if any?
The number one inspiration for me was Galen Rowell. I was turned on to his work right after I started shooting, just a few months after I bought my camera. And he was undoubtedly the father of modern day adventure photography. He was from California and climbed a lot in Yosemite and adventured all over the world. And he basically invented the game for guys like me. You know, he paved the way. And so he was my biggest influence. I actually did a photo workshop trek with him in northern Nepal in 1993, just a couple years after I bought my first camera. And so he was an amazing influence. And since that, other influences, I mean, I see there's just so many people on the web who have amazing work. You know, some of my contemporaries, guys like Corey Rich, Michael Clark, Dan Patitucci, you know, those guys are really pushing the limits of, you know, the guys who are in my generation, and they're out there doing the most amazing things and taking great photos. So there's people in every generation who inspire me. And I'm inspired by the younger generation. I've got guys who follow me who are 25 years old, who were, you know, in junior high when I started shooting pro, and now they're starting to make their mark in the industry, and they're doing great work. And so I get inspired by seeing the young guys come up too.
Yeah, speaking of Galen Rowell, I happen to have here. I was kidding. I saw you mentioning him in your blog post, and I said, "Oh, I have a book by Galen on my shelf. I should take it out." Yeah, it's I love his work, and I love his writing too. This is I don't know if you know this book. I would highly recommend this one to anyone who wants. I
do have that.
Yeah, and it's I think it's a collection of articles that he wrote for magazines and newspapers. And so
yeah, I really like his books, and especially that one, because I did like his writing as well. I was influenced as much by his writing and some of his just the way he presented information and the way he thought about photography in the world. And what I liked about it was that he came at it from such a broad standpoint. He didn't. When you read his books, you see he doesn't just say, "Oh, use this lens, use this technique. This is what you should do." He really talks about things on a broader level with human perception, human vision, how we see the world, how we perceive, you know, what's going on around us. And so that's been a real influence on me for my writing as well.
Great. I would like to talk a bit about technique. How do you use your gear? You come from you started when cameras were not as smart as they are today. So I think that maybe the fact that some people today are able to produce great images is, at least in part, I mean, if you don't have the vision, if you don't have the sensitivity to and the eye to composition and light and so on, no matter the equipment, it will be hard to get any good results. But on the other hand, if you have those, the cameras nowadays, they help a lot, I think. Do you agree with that?
I do. The cameras today are amazing technology. You know, between autofocus, auto exposure, all the different options that you have, they provide so many tools for people to get great photos. And you're right. When I started, I was shooting manual body with manual focus lenses, and that's how I learned. And so for me, and I think that helped me transition to mirrorless gear too, because when I first started using the X10 and the X20 and the XE1, those were not as capable cameras as my Nikon D700 and the D300 that I was using. You know, they just were not, they didn't have the same autofocus speed, and they didn't have the same, you know, performance level. And so drawing back from my manual focus and manual exposure days of 20 years ago, I came out. I really liked using those cameras because they were so light and they offered a great sense of freedom. But in order to get the kind of images that I wanted to get, I had to adapt and figure out how to make them work for me, remembering the techniques that I use, things like pre-focusing, just being aware of where your subject matter might be instead of trying to track it. If your autofocus isn't very fast, you can't track a moving subject. But maybe you can pre-focus on a place where you know that subject's going to be. And then it's a matter of nailing the timing and hitting the shutter at the right time.
Any tips that you might want to give to people who might be watching this on how to get the best results with nowadays cameras for, I don't know, for action rather than for landscape? Would you recommend using autofocus, single autofocus, continuous, hyperfocal distance?
For action, I think continuous autofocus is a vital tool, as is continuous frame rate. So a lot of times I keep my XT1 on continuous mode because one of the disadvantages of mirrorless cameras is that if you're on single mode and you take a picture, the frame blacks out. The viewfinder blacks out for just a second, and it blacks out for a little longer than what DSLRs do, and so that's a little hard to get used to. And they don't refresh. If I'm shooting on single mode with the Nikon DSLR, as fast as I can press my finger on the shutter, it'll keep firing the frames. With the mirrorless cameras, right now it's not that fast, but if you put it into continuous mode, you can capture those bursts and get rapid frame rates. So I advocate using continuous mode a lot. As far as techniques for shooting action, a lot of times the best thing to do is to figure out what your limiting factor is and start there. So if I have a fast moving subject, I know that I have to have a high shutter speed. So set your high shutter speed first. If I want a shallow focus, I know I need a shallow aperture. So I need to, open the f-stop ring up. So I take care of those, the things that I know need to be addressed, address those first. And that gets those out of the way. Then you have the time to focus on the rest of the technical aspects and the creative aspects of taking the picture.
What part of your photography do you think that post-processing plays? Yeah. Do you do a lot of post-processing work? Do you do that on your own? And if you do, what are your favorite tools?
For me, it plays a very small part simply because I don't have very much time. I don't have time to devote to sit down and spend a lot of time processing a ton of photos or doing very involved things. Every once in a while I'll take a photo and run with it, but for the most part, I like my photos to reflect what I saw at the time, and I'll probably bump up some exposure or add some clarity, adjust the shadows and the tonality of the picture, but I tend to do minimal processing. These days, I use Lightroom and Iridiant Developer. The Fuji RAW files they're really exceptional. There's a lot of information in them, but the way the sensor is designed on the Fuji cameras is that you don't have the traditional Bayer pattern. And so all the algorithms and the processing that Lightroom and Photoshop do are written for Bayer pattern sensors. So they don't do an excellent job with the Fuji RAW files. So that's where Iridiant Developer, Capture One Pro, some of those other programs, I've heard that Photo Ninja does a good job. Those programs do a much better job demosaicing the initial step in the raw file conversion, and so you can get sharper images by using those other programs. At least with the raw files, Lightroom does great with the JPEGs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard that that observation from many people, and myself I have tested the Iridiant Developer, and yeah, for many images for many type of images. It actually does a much better job in getting out the most detail out of those Fuji RAW files. I was planning to try Capture One. I was actually going to, when I have a bit of time, I'm going to download the trial version and start processing a bit of files that I have lying there and see if it makes much of a difference in with respect to Lightroom, which is my main tool.
Yeah, and I really like Capture One. I think it's an amazing program. And now the latest versions of Capture One Pro have a catalog feature built in. So if a photographer, for whatever reason, didn't want to use Adobe because of the monthly subscription or whatever, Capture One does offer a full solution where you can catalog and keyword and archive your images and process them. And the processing is gorgeous. You know, it's a little bit of a different learning curve to use the tools they have, but the processing is gorgeous. And I was using that for a while. But I went back to Iridiant Developer and tried that again. What I like about that is just it's so simple. It's just I can bring a photo from Lightroom and just drag it right out of Lightroom onto the icon in my dock and open up an Iridiant Developer. The processing is very straightforward and it's very good. And then I just simple export. I can send it back to Lightroom. I can save it to my folder to be uploaded to the web or wherever. So. And the amazing thing is it's written by one guy. You know, a Iridiant developer is one person.
Yeah, I will have to spend some time evaluating again my processing workflow because it's you always get second thoughts and you say, okay.
Yeah, and I tried a Iridiant developer about a year ago, and it doesn't have the same really fancy user interface that something like Lightroom or Capture One does. But I decided to give it a try again, and it's just it's bare bones, but it's powerful and it does a great job.
Yeah, I was a bit scared by its interface because it has so many options when you process a file, and I don't understand like 90% of them, what they mean and what they do. In comparison, Lightroom does many more things, but in terms of processing, you have fewer choices. So
And the thing is, you know, we're all busy photographers, whether we're pros or amateurs. Our time is very valuable, and our money too. And so it can be tricky to find the right solution because no one program does everything perfectly, but you don't want to get bogged down with too many programs. Mm-hmm. And so it's a challenge to find the one or two programs that will work perfectly and figure out how to use them seamlessly to make your workflow simple, because that's what you want. You want a simple workflow. I want to sit down, download my pictures, process them as needed, and then I'm done and I can go out and shoot more photos and not spend so much time with all the other tasks.
I'm still hoping that one day Adobe will buy off Iridiant Developer or Capture One and incorporate the algorithm into Adobe Camera Raw, and we'll have one tool to rule them all.
Yeah, and you know, I see the technology, the Iridiant Developer would probably be more likely candidate, but the truth is that most cameras that have ever been made, most digital cameras, use a Bayer pattern sensor. Mm-hmm. And so Lightroom works for the widest number of cameras. And it just so happens that the Fuji engineers went, well, let's try something a little different. And it ended up that they created a sensor that produces exceptionally sharp pictures, but it requires, you know, a slightly different algorithm to pull that detail out. And Adobe just has, Adobe, to their credit, did include the Fuji color profiles in a past, I think it was Lightroom 5.4 that had those. But they still haven't, even from what I heard with the latest update that came out yesterday or 2 days ago, still don't have you know the extended support for the X-Trans files.
No, I don't think I installed Lightroom 6 yesterday, but I haven't done any tests in terms of the mosaicing to see if it's any different from the previous version. But
from what I heard, it's not.
I haven't heard any information about that in the list of new features. That one is not included. Anyway,
and they went to face recognition and HDR and panorama. That seemed like the three big things they were pushing.
Yeah, I've tried that. I do quite a bit of HDR, and I do the occasional panorama, and I could do them with Photoshop and photo merge in Photoshop. So I can get the same results now with Lightroom quicker, because Lightroom doesn't have to export all the files, send them to Photoshop. Photoshop has to reopen them all. Then maybe the stitching isn't right, and you have to try again with different parameters. The workflow is much more streamlined and quicker now. You get the same results in the end, but it's easier to use. Speaking of more time wasters that have nothing to do with actually taking the photos, do you do a lot of social media work to promote your work, to find clients, to get known? Do you think this is very important nowadays?
I think it's vitally important, and I spend way too much time at it, and not necessarily in the best ways. But no one really knows I mean, there is no magic secret one way to do social media. It's just a new form of marketing, and so I do spend a lot of time on social media, finding clients and promoting my work. The other aspect of social media that has really made a big difference for me is finding. I've done a lot of workshops, and I've now written a book, and I've written a lot of ebooks. And so from the teaching standpoint, and finding people to share my knowledge with, and people who are much more likely to be interested in my ebooks, social media and blogging has been a huge thing to finding those people around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that many people told me that it's if you want to get your name out as somebody who is an expert in the field, doing social media and doing ebooks, for instance, is very, very much important. So you write ebooks. I think I saw mentioned on your blog that you are actually writing two print books that are going to come out recently.
I actually have one of them has just come out.
Oh.
It's called Outdoor Action and Adventure Photography, and it's published by Focal Press. And this is just out this week, or last week it was published, and it's available on Amazon. And thank you. It's it's a lot of work. It's 300 pages, and as you can see, it's mostly writing. So I was, and that, truthfully, that started from my social media. I started a blog a number of years ago, and I started just putting my thoughts and my tips and techniques and my thoughts about the photography world. And one of the people who started following me was the publisher of Focal Press. And within a few years, we nailed out, she wanted me to write a book for them. And so we nailed out an idea and got it done. And here it is. So, it's, to me, it's a perfect example of, if you put yourself out there and do something, you never know what's going to come of it. I always wanted to write a book, but I didn't know how that was going to happen. So I just went ahead and wrote on my blog, and that led to that. So
I think you really have to put yourself out and to be yourself, right? Don't pretend
absolutely.
to be somebody that you are not.
Yeah, and that's absolutely the truth, because everybody has a different story, a different path, a different set of interests, a different set of skills, and everybody has an appeal in a different way to everybody out in the world. And so if you try to copy somebody else, you're going to do yourself a disservice. You should instead focus on what you feel you're good at, and most importantly, what you love, because you're going to do the best work that you can do when you do that.
All right. So I would like to thank you for this conversation that we had today. It was really, really interesting and inspiring. Is there anything else that you would like to bring to the attention of our viewers?
Other than you can get my book on Amazon or on my blog. And yeah, I feel that mirrorless cameras are the future. but that's just my opinion. I know there's a lot of people out there who still shoot DSLRs, and they do fabulous work. And it's just, you know, like you said in the beginning, they're just tools. And I just happen to find these tools work for me. And so in the end, it's not really about what camera you use, it's about how you use it. And I think with the web and all the gear around us, we can obsess way too much about equipment. And really what we need to do is just get out, step out our front doors and take some pictures.
Where is your next trip?
That's funny you should ask that. I'm trying to plan that right now. I've had to cancel a couple of vacations to finish writing the book and everything, but I'm trying to plan a bike trip in the mountains in Oregon for next month. Mm-hmm. I'm going to be going aboard, going on a 10-day boat tour of the St. Lawrence Strait in northern Canada with Adventure Canada and Fujifilm Canada, and that'll be in June. And then I'll be back in Alaska for July and August to do some photo workshops here and adventuring. And then I've got some ideas for the fall. I'd like to go to Romania and do a bike tour in September, October.
So you do workshops and about adventure and photography? I
do. I have a number of workshops that I teach throughout the year. I've got a company called...
People can find about them, learn about them on your website, which would be
danbaileyphoto.com. And if you go to my blog, you can find all the information out about my workshops and my teaching and my book and my gear and my ebooks and all kinds of tips. I've got a lot. My blog is largely geared towards tips and helping other photographers and sharing my insight. You know, got a lot of knowledge and information I've gained over the past 20 years, and so I'd like to share that with other photographers.
I'm sure that people will find a lot to learn from you. So thanks again for being with us today, and we will put a link to your website on the blog post when we publish this.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ugo. It was a great time speaking with you.
Yeah, thanks for your time, and hope to see you soon.
Yeah, I've actually been to Milan. I just passed through the train station, but I'd like to get back there.
Yeah, when you get back there, just let me know.
Okay.
I'll show you some of the more adventurous places around here, which there aren't many. But in the Alps, you know, you can do...
Oh, yeah. Well, I didn't...
you can still see some wildlife. There's not much left, but...
I was in Italy, actually, 2 summers ago. I did a week-long bike tour down the Via Claudia Augusta Trail from Germany through Austria and Tyrol region, and then down to Trento and Verona.
Great. Okay. Hope to see you here in Italy, or maybe someday I will come to Alaska. Who knows?
Come to Alaska, Ugo. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. Bye.